Did week one deliver a new wide receiver 3 for your roster? Is your backfield suddenly way more screwed than you thought it was? Is it Daniel Jones season? Week two is about not overreacting to 1 week of results, but we also don't want to underreact because the right early season waiver edition just might define your season. This year's first waiver wire episode of the Draft Sharks podcast starts right now. Schauf and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to talk you through the week 2 waiver wire run. We finally got our first week of actual results, but it's also just 1 week. Some guys are about to emerge as unexpected contributors. Other surprise guys from week 1, though, are going to reveal that they're just a mirage. Jared, let's start with your favorite overall target for this week's waiver wire run. Who are you going after?
Yeah, and I'd start by saying this feels like a less impactful week 1 waiver run than usual.
Agreed.
You know, a lot of times this is the most impactful week because you get these guys for the rest of the season, but kind of light on injuries in week 1, thankfully. And I don't see anyone that's like a must grab this week. But my top target would be Marquise Brown. I think, he's set to play the Rashee Rice role over the next 5 games. You look at what Brown did in that week 1 game against the Chargers, 16 targets on a 41% target share. Then you just look at how he was deployed. 52% of his routes came from the slot. Again, that's where Rashee Rice is going to play when he returns. 6.7 yard average target depth for Marquise Brown. A lot of that stuff was short to him. He had the one deep ball late in the game, but most of his catches were short. So I just think he's going to be a pretty steady floor PPR play for the next 5 weeks. Now, Rashee Rice is going to be back, and after the 6-game suspension, we'll see if Xavier Worthy's going to be back. So I would not go blowing a big portion of my budget on Marquise Brown. I don't think he's going to be a league winner, but I do think, especially if you're someone who had Xavier Worthy or Drake London, we'll see if he misses time. If you're in need of immediate help at wide receiver, I do think Marquise Brown is going to find himself definitely inside the top 40 in our weekly rankings, maybe even inside the top 30 as we start to kind of sort these things out.
I think he probably belongs inside the top 30 for the reasons you alluded to. You mentioned the 52% slot rate. That is almost exactly what Rashee Rice did over the past 2 years. It's actually slightly higher, but basically the same. And we've seen over the time where it's Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes in charge of this passing offense, the lead wide receiver is like half inside, half outside. So to see Hollywood Brown do that in week 1 is encouraging. League high 16 targets for that game, 10 catches, 99 yards. Like you said, Rashee Rice is out for another 5 games. We're still waiting to see what the team and Xavier Worthy are going to do with that shoulder injury. It sounds like he's going to try to play through it, but it's not even clear that he's going to succeed in playing through it if he decides to try to do that. So I think Hollywood Brown is a guy to try to add this week. Like you said, Jared, I wouldn't blow my waiver budget to make sure I get him because he's probably not a full season answer, and he has his own issues with injury history. So I would go after him. I would stop short of 30% of my budget. And I think within that window, how much to put on him really depends on how much you need him and, how much room you have for him on your roster.
Yeah. The other thing potentially working in Brown's favor is, Travis Kelce might be done. The fact that he was that invisible in that opener after Xavier Worthy leaves on the 3rd play and they need someone to step up, and Kelce, besides the well schemed play that got him wide open down the right side, then he was pretty much invisible in that game. So that's super worrisome. That obviously helps Brown's chances to I think be the clear top target in this passing game for the next 5 weeks.
Now, moving on to quarterback, we all had Daniel Jones projected as the QB2 heading into week 1 and Aaron Rodgers as QB7. So now that those things went exactly as we expected, I think it's time to figure out where these guys belong week 2 and even beyond that. Now, it gains extra relevance because Brock Purdy, for one, has been in people's starting plans, has a couple injuries he's dealing with, might not be an option as soon as this week, probably shouldn't be in fantasy lineups, even if he's ready to go in that game. But Jared, focusing on Aaron Rodgers and Daniel Jones, what are we doing with these guys? Are they worth your waiver attention this week?
I will say Daniel Jones was higher than I think we were all comfortable with in our week 1 ranking. So hopefully if you were in 2 quarterback super flex leagues, you might have had him in your lineup. I'm definitely more interested in Daniel Jones than Aaron Rodgers going forward. We've seen Jones have these, spike weeks in the past, right? Because the big reason why is because he can produce with his legs, which we saw in that week 1 game. Had the 2 touchdowns Jones did in that win over Miami. We can't count on those going forward, but he had 7 carries for 26 yards. He had 4 designed runs. That was tied for 5th most among quarterbacks in week one. So I think the Colts are, set to use his mobility, pretty consistently throughout the season. He's going to add rushing ability for us. And I just think for Jones, this is probably his best setup he's had of his career, right? A lot of the Giants teams he played on were bad offensive lines. The Colts offensive line is fine. The weapons are good. I mean, Tyler Warren looked awesome in week one. Michael Pittman looked healthy in week one. We didn't even get to see Josh Downs much, but he's still a good player. So Jones has the, infrastructure in place here, throw in the rushing ability. I don't think he's going to be someone you want to use often in one quarterback leagues, but maybe as a spot start option, and definitely in super flex leagues, I think he's going to be a nice quarterback too.
The biggest limitation for me on Daniel Jones as a waiver option this week is that he's got Denver in week 2, and I don't want to play Daniel Jones against Denver. I'm going to need to see more than a big game against Miami, who I think is probably going to wind up being one of the worst defenses in the league. So it was a really good start for Daniel Jones. It was, encouraging usage. And like you said, there's plenty around him. And Jonathan Taylor, by the way, not a big factor for receiving specifically, but him being there is going to keep defenses from, over game planning against the pass. So I like the start for Daniel Jones. Like you said, we've seen the upside in the past. I think he's going to be an option going forward. I wouldn't look to him as week 2 play, maybe week 3 at Tennessee. We're still gathering data, obviously, on all these teams. We'll see whether the Titans are a good defense, because they seem to play pretty well against Denver in week 1. But yeah, I'm interested in Daniel Jones going forward. I'm probably not going to be the buyer if multiple teams want him in my league for week 2. Aaron Rodgers similarly has a challenging schedule coming up. Now, the Jets looked like a bad matchup for him in week 1, so maybe he and the offense are better than we thought. That said, I'm not sure I'm going to be ready to play Aaron Rodgers in week 2 against Seattle unless, I just entered the season with a shaky quarterback situation, or I had Brock Purdy and suddenly need a week 2 answer.
Yeah, Seattle's a defense that I think we're going to want to be avoiding for this season, for the most part. They did well against the Niners in week 1. Rodgers gets the Patriots in week 3. That's a fine matchup. But then he gets Minnesota in week 4 and then a bye week. So the schedule is definitely not helping him here. I will not be the Aaron Rodgers buyer off the waiver wire in any of my leagues this week. We're going to look back at this Jets Steelers game by the end of the season and say, how the hell did that happen? How did these teams combine for, 70, whatever points it was? I just think that game was fluky early on both sides, for Rodgers. Touchdown to Ben Skoranek. He has one of his other touchdowns was one of those, pop passes to Jonnu Smith from the 1 or 2 yard line. The Steelers were still negative in pass rate over expected. They were minus 1% pass rate over expected. It's still an Arthur Smith offense that is going to want to run the ball plenty. I'm not buying this Rodgers thing. Maybe if you need a starter in a 2 quarterback league, fine. But in 1 quarterback leagues, I would not even bother with him.
I'm sure we'll get more starter weeks, but not somebody that I'm suddenly looking to start week after week. So I think I'm in the same area on Aaron Rodgers. I'll be curious to see how this week goes against Seattle, both because, like you said, I think this defense is going to be good, and I expect that the offense in Pittsburgh is not going to be as good as we saw in week 1. But, it's brand new season, so we'll see on both fronts.
Yep.
And then, as you mentioned, beyond that, they're at New England, home for Minnesota. So we'll see what those matchups look like. But like you said, nothing scary about the Patriots. Then a week 5 bye, I think, cuts at the early value of Aaron Rodgers as well. The free agent finder, by the way, is one of the most useful tools that you're going to find on draftsharks.com. And that's not me spouting the company line. I'm not sure exactly how everybody else on my team feels about that. That's my personal take, because managing weekly waiver runs is my biggest issue throughout the season very easily. I always have more teams than I can comfortably manage. I have trouble keeping track of who I have on those rosters, and my leagues vary a lot in format, level of competition. So that means wide variations in who's available, who makes sense for my team. So I can go into the free agent finder for any of my teams, any of my leagues, see who is actually available in that league, see who makes sense for my specific roster needs, for my specific scoring system. And then when we find out inevitably that the starting running back suddenly has an injury in the middle of the week that's going to keep him out for who knows how long, I can quickly check the cross league function to see where his backup is available, rather than wasting a bunch of time going to each of my leagues to see if this guy is here. I can take one look, shows me where I can go after him, shows me where I don't need to waste my time. It saves me loads of time every week throughout the season. Jared, when I go into the free agent finder this week, is there any running back that I should be looking for?
Yeah, it's not a good week to need a running back on the waiver wire. We dodged any major running back injuries, so there's no handcuffs to add. I have a few names that I think are worth rostering in leagues of 12 plus teams at this point. First, I want to shout out Bashal Tutin who we talked about plenty this summer, but with the Tank Bigsby trade to Philadelphia. Now, the issue for Tootin is that Travis Etienne looked really good in the opener. So I think Etienne is the guy for now. We'll see Tootin mix in a bit more now that he, I think, is going to be, at least a clear number 2 guy on early downs. Jags were also using their other rookie, LaQuint Allen, on passing down. So, they're still going to use 3 guys there. But Tootin, I still think, if nothing else, high-end handcuff. The Jags running game looked awesome in week 1. If Tootin ever gets a chance to take over, he's a high upside option. Tyler Algier is available in about 65% of leagues on Sleeper. He, somewhat surprisingly, 10 carries in week 1 to Bijan Robinson's 12. Now, I think a lot of that was Bijan played such a big role in the passing game that it just, opened up some more carries for Tyler Algier. I still don't think Algier is a, standalone fantasy option, but we know he's an awesome handcuff, and, he's available in a lot of leagues. That's another case where, drop that, 6th wide receiver that you're never going to use, stash Tyler Algier instead. And last guy I wanted to shout out, more of a deeper league option, Brashard Smith for the Chiefs. I just think it's bullish that the 7th round rookie already has a role in this backfield. Now, it was a pretty small role. I think he played like 8 snaps in that game. Most of it came on passing downs, but Kareem Hunt did not look good to me again. Pacheco did look good to me, but he didn't get the usage we were looking for. I just think there's a chance Brashard Smith's role grows enough in the passing game, especially with all these issues the Chiefs are having in the pass catching core, right? I think, Smith's role could grow enough where as we get into bye weeks, he, could be a option in deeper PPR leagues.
And I agree, not only with those players, but with that style of player to look at this week at running back. I don't think that we had guys really emerge as immediate fantasy help at the position, as you said at the top. So I think it makes it a good time to go after the quiet ones, the handcuffs like Bashal Tootin, like Tyler Algier, who didn't do anything to draw attention in week 1 and then have your league mates chasing them on waivers this week, but still have that handcuff upside so you can stash them for cheaper. And then if the starter ahead of them goes down, you've already got that guy instead of having to chase him down. Kenneth Gainwell, I think, is the closest guy to actually gaining value in week 1 to me. Things went the way that the preseason suggested that they would. I think that we're still seeing just how playing time and touches are going to get divvied in that Pittsburgh backfield. But Kenneth Gainwell actually outsnapped Jaylen Warren in week 1. Didn't do anything meaningful with it in terms of production, but at the very least, he's a short-term handcuff in an offense that surprised in the opener. Like we said, we're not expecting the same things going forward, but if they continue to surprise, then you're going to want a piece like that. And Kenneth Gainwell is an experienced running back who has receiving upside. We'll see if Caleb Johnson, the rookie, pushes him aside, but, might as well stash Kenneth Gainwell on the cheap until that happens.
Yeah, like you said, Gainwell didn't play well. He also lost a fumble in that game. I'm curious to see what his role looks like in week 2 and beyond. Yeah, we're worth a stash in deeper leagues. I still will be shocked if Caleb Johnson doesn't start, working into that mix sooner rather than later here.
And hey, if Caleb Johnson got dropped in your league, go ahead and stash him. But basically at running back, we're stashing guys this week instead of chasing players who can help us quickly. Jared, at wide receiver, anybody that looks helpful beyond Hollywood Brown?
Yeah, Cedric Tillman is worth adding. He's available in over half of leagues on Sleeper. We talked about Tillman. It was only that 4-game stretch last year that he was a full-time player, but 10 targets per game over those 4 games. He was wide receiver 9 in PPR points per game. 2025 season opener, 96% route rate for Cedric Tillman, full-time player, 8 targets and an 18% target share, catches 5 of them for 52 yards and a score. So, that's five games now over the past 2 seasons where Tillman was a full-time player and was really productive in fantasy. The other reason to like Cedric Tillman is, the Browns in week 1, 66% pass rate. They were second in the NFL in neutral pass rate. They were plus 5% pass rate over expected. The running game was horrible. I think they averaged like under 3 yards per carry. I think that the running backs did. So I would expect this to continue to be a pass leaning offense and for Cedric Tillman to, be a pretty big part of that.
Yeah, I would expect some shift once Quinshon Judkins is ready to go, but certainly they're built to pass plenty this year. And I like Cedric Tillman. I think the other factor working in his favor is the assumed number 1 wide receiver there is Jerry Jeudy. Never really been a true number 1. So there's room for Cedric Tillman to be the best receiver by the end of the season in that lineup. I like Kayshon Boutte in New England for similar reasons, not just because if I have him on my team and in my lineup that week, I can sit in my living room and be like, Boutte, anytime he does something. Beyond that, there's actual value, 70+% playing time in every game dating back to week 6 of last season. We've had a coaching staff change since then. He still led the group in playing time against the Raiders in week 1 of this year, 83% there. He's gone over 80% in 11 of those past 13 games over that aforementioned stretch. 6+ targets in 8 of those 13 games as well. 4+ catches in 4 straight games now, dating back to last season. So I think we're all expecting to see more from Stephon Diggs as he gets further removed from that ACL tear. But there's at least a chance that Kayshon Boutte ends up being the best and most productive receiver in New England this season. So I think he's worth putting on a roster this week and seeing how things play out.
Boutte, once upon a time, was like a really high-end prospect, too. So it's not like this guy's come out of nowhere. The Patriots are another team that were surprisingly pass-heavy in week 1. They were top 5 in the NFL in neutral pass rate in the opener, so that would only help Boutte's chances.
Tight ends to target. Jared, before we get to the names, I want to throw a couple of reminders out from the past couple of seasons. 2024, these were your top week 1 PPR scorers at tight end. Isaiah Likely with that monster game at Kansas City that he will probably never match again. Foster Moreau, Brock Bowers, Kyle Pitts, and Juwan Johnson, the only 5 guys at the position to hit double digits in PPR points. The year before that, just so you know, it's not a one-year fluke I'm talking about, 2023, the double-digit guys were Hunter Henry, Hayden Hurst, TJ Hawkinson, Donald Parham. Now, obviously, you see a couple of guys who stayed useful. Brock Bowers, obviously, TJ Hawkinson beyond that stretch. But plenty of other names of guys where you're like, oh, maybe this guy's about to be a thing. And then the rest of the season showed us that he wasn't a thing. So with that in mind, 2025, who's going to be a thing?
Yeah, and that's just tight end in general, right? It's just the toughest position to predict on a week-to-week basis. It tends to be, fueled by touchdowns more than any other position. There are 2 tight ends I think are worth grabbing off waiver wires this week. Harold Fannin Jr. and Juwan Johnson, I think, are the top 2 ads. And I kind of been going back and forth between these 2 guys. I've even had some folks ask on Twitter which one they would rather grab, and I've sort of been waffling. And then I remembered, we always talk about upside is what wins in fantasy, and that's what is pushing me towards Harold Fannin. Even though Juwan Johnson had the better week 1 role, Harold Fannin's week 1 role was nice as well. It's interesting. This Browns team, Fannin, if you look at the usage and how they ran the offense in week 1, Fannin was basically the team's number 2 tight end and the team's number 3 wide receiver. He ran her out on 65% of the dropbacks. That's a bit lower than we want to see, but he was in line at traditional tight end for 53% of his snaps, but he was in the slot for 29%. He was out wide for 11%. He was in the backfield for 7% of his snaps, even got a carry on like a wildcat play. That was interesting to see. And he saw 9 targets on a 20% target share. So the Browns clearly game planned to make Harold Fannin a big part of their week 1 plan as a rookie, which is, I think, just super bullish for his going forward out. He still needs, I think, get more playing time than he got in the opener to be a reliable fantasy play. But again, we're talking about a rookie here. These guys generally get more as the season goes along. So I think Fannin is just an exciting stash. We've also heard David Njoku mentioned as a potential trade candidate, which I think makes sense because he's in the last year of his deal. This Browns team is obviously going nowhere this year. So if Njoku gets traded, I think you're talking about Fannin as, a definite top 12 fantasy tight end.
And Njoku would make sense as an ad for a contending team because he's certainly plenty talented. Plenty of upside, I agree, to Fannin and Juwan Johnson. Hunter Henry, I'll throw out there as well. I know that he probably got drafted in maybe most of the leagues of people who are watching and listening to this, but there are also plenty of places where he went outside the top 16, 18, might not have been drafted in your league. Playing time was up in week 1 versus last year's usual. More separation between him and Austin Hooper. I believe in this year's Patriots coaching staff much more than last year. So we've seen Hunter Henry in and out of relevance. I think that there's a better chance he stays relevant this year. The high passing volume in week 1 for New England overall boosted everybody's target numbers. His target share was below 20%, but I think that we can expect something in that 18% to 20+% range for Hunter Henry on a weekly basis going forward. And it's a cheap way to bet on Drake May in year 2.
Yep. I like that one. And then, just on Juwan Johnson real quick, 96% route rate in week 1. It's like almost unheard of for a tight end. Just if you look at last year, Trey McBride led all tight ends at a 91% route rate. Juwan Johnson saw 11 targets on a 24% target share, caught 8 for 76 yards. The Saints offense wasn't good, and I don't expect it to be very good all year, but we did get the play volume I talked about all summer from Kellen Moore. They ran 69 plays in that game, and they threw 46 passes. Now, we're not going to get that much pass volume every week, But if they're running a lot of plays and they're a bad team, they're playing from behind, the pass rate's going to be pretty high. Like you're going to get plenty of passing volume from this team. And Juwan Johnson, I believe we talked about him some in the summer. Just he got that pretty big extension in the offseason. It was like 3 years, 30 something million.
Surprisingly big.
Yeah. So like it was obvious this guy was a part of the new coaching staff's plan. There's not much a pass catcher behind those top 2 wide receivers. So I'm buying Juwan Johnson, being a big part of this passing game all year.
I agree. I was not necessarily on board heading in, but I think now combining that week 1 usage with the offseason extension, I mean, what's to bet against really at the price you're paying? Week 2 streaming defense. If you're looking for a defense for this week, I think the Rams at Tennessee stand out as a pretty easy one if they're available. We'll see whether Cam Ward becomes a weekly DST target for us or if he's just starting slowly in rough matchups. But I love the sack upside to this one. There's really not much downside risk. Tough to imagine the Titans, blowing up and scoring 30 plus points and hurting us in this one. If the Rams aren't available, I think San Francisco is interesting as well. 35% rostered on Yahoo. So available in plenty of places. They're at New Orleans in week 2, home for Arizona in week 3, and another potentially usable spot.
Yep, with you on those two. I think the Titans and the Saints at this point look like the top 2 offenses to target with DSTs. If you can't get the Rams or Niners for this week, I do think the Cardinals are in play. They played well in that plus matchup against the Saints last week, and they get Carolina, who, man, Carolina did not look good. That was disappointing to see Bryce Young look like, rookie year Brycing in that game. So I'm worried. I think for now, the Panthers are another offense we can attack.
Looking ahead to week 3, if you're in a league where, a bunch of different managers are trying to stream those defenses, maybe you want to get ahead and stash one for week 3. Jared, I like Green Bay at Cleveland in week 3. The Packers stunted the Lions on offense in week 1. They've got Washington this week, so you're not going to want to take a shot on that downside matchup. But Green Bay might just be one of the league's best defenses this year. It was already a fairly talented group. They added Micah Parsons, who looked very good on somewhat limited playing time in week 1. So a week 3 option and maybe just generally stashable for a league where that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wouldn't want to use Green Bay this week versus Washington. But the week 3 matchup's obviously awesome against Cleveland, and that could be a defense you're using most of the weeks for the rest of the season. I think the best week 3 streamer, though, is Seattle, who's home for New Orleans. And again, I think Seattle's another defense, maybe not quite as good as Green Bay, but just going to be a good defense that we can use a lot this season. And then you look at who plays the Titans in week 3. That's the Colts. Played, I guess, well against Miami. I feel like Miami just more played poorly than the Colts defense played well, but encouraging nonetheless. And again, it's that Titans matchup that I think we're going to want to attack at least early on this season.
The free agent finder is ready to help you set your roster for week 2 and beyond to find the options that we talked about that are available in your league and show you who makes sense for your specific roster. You can also find articles with waiver recommendations for offense, for streaming defenses, even for IDPs if you play those like I do on draftsharks.com right now. Lots more content will hit the site throughout the week, and we'll be back here Friday with the week 2 preview episode of the podcast. We're into our usual weekly in-season rotation now, waivers early in the week, weekly preview later in the week. So follow us on YouTube or wherever you get your audio podcasts, in whatever format that you're playing. Draft Sharks is here to be your unfair advantage.